Karen kept destroying my mailbox, so I replaced it with a titanium mailbox. If I had told you a year ago that I would get involved in a fierce battle over a mailbox, I would have definitely thought you were crazy. But who would have guessed that the conflict would begin with such an innocuous thing, a mailbox, and the main character in this story, none other than my neighbor, Karen. Let me tell you how this all started. One early morning in March, I went outside to collect the mail as usual. But immediately, I noticed something was wrong. My mailbox, a very ordinary mailbox, was oddly tilted. It wasn't anything major. I thought it might be the wind or some mischievous kids running by. Maybe it's just an accident, I reassured myself. But then, the next week, it happened again. The mailbox was tilted once more, this time much more noticeably, as if someone had deliberately bumped into it. What? No way, I told myself, but a small doubt started to grow in my mind. I'm not the type to jump to conclusions, but this kept happening regularly, like clockwork. Every week, the mailbox would be tilted just a little bit more. By early April, I decided that I needed to do something. I no longer wanted to just sit by and accept this. I installed a security camera right outside my door. People in the neighborhood would probably think I was overreacting, but I didn't care. And honestly, I didn't install the camera because of the mailbox, but because there had been some petty thefts in the area recently. But once the truth was revealed, I realized it was a very wise decision. Right after setting up the security system, I sat down and opened the app to check. The screen displayed a scene that I couldn't believe. In the video, I saw Karen, my neighbor, in a full floral nightgown, yes, a complete floral nightgown, standing in front of my house at 2 a.m., holding a flashlight, nervously looking around. She looked like she was preparing to carry out a serious attack, and without hesitation, she lifted her foot and kicked my mailbox with full determination. I sat there, unable to believe what I was watching. What is she doing? I thought to myself. Karen's powerful kick caused the mailbox to lean dramatically to one side, and then she walked away as if she had just completed an important mission. She didn't even look back at the mailbox that had fallen to the ground. Now I understood the problem. Enough was enough. This wasn't an accident anymore. This was a war, and Karen was my arch nemesis. If she wanted to fight me over a mailbox, I was going to make her regret starting this battle. You know, after watching the video of Karen accidentally kicking my mailbox, I had to sit back and catch my breath for a moment. I realized I had truly encountered one of the strangest people in this neighborhood. But instead of doing the natural thing, calling the police or yelling at her, I decided I needed to think smarter. I couldn't let Karen continue to see me as an easy target. She wanted to play the mailbox war? Well, I'd play right back, but not in the simple way. So I started planning. You might think I'm crazy, but I was absolutely serious. Initially, I thought about installing a concrete mailbox, but then I thought, why keep it simple? Karen could just bring a drill and destroy it all. So I needed something truly indestructible. After a few days of thinking, I came up with a brilliant idea, maybe a bit over the top. Titanium. That's right, I decided I would install a mailbox made of titanium. Not just any mailbox, but one that would require an atomic bomb to destroy. I called a locksmith and told him, I need a titanium mailbox as tough as steel, indestructible. He looked at me like I had just asked him to build a spaceship. But after I explained the situation, he immediately understood and agreed. A few days later, I received an actual titanium mailbox. It was so heavy that I had to ask a few friends to help me install it. And of course, I couldn't skip the concrete post to ensure the mailbox wouldn't budge, no matter how hard it was attacked. When I looked at the super tough mailbox, I felt proud. Not just because it looked impressive, but because I knew Karen would be facing a challenge she couldn't easily overcome. But the interesting thing was, I didn't rush to provoke her immediately. I wanted to see her reaction when she saw the new mailbox. I wanted her to know that if she wanted to play the destroy the mailbox game, she would now be up against a steel wall. The next morning, as I stood supervising the installation of the mailbox, I saw Karen's car drive by. She stopped right in front of my house, opened the car door, and stared at me. Her face had a mix of surprise and disdain. At first, I thought she would just turn around and leave, but no, Karen kept staring at me as if asking, "Who is this guy? And why has he put up a steel pole in the middle of our neighborhood?" I quietly laughed to myself and continued overseeing the installation work. That night, after the titanium mailbox was fully installed, I sat comfortably on the sofa, sipping my coffee, opening the security camera app, and preparing to enjoy the next comedic act. I knew Karen couldn't resist seeing this super tough mailbox, and I was right. At 2 a.m., like someone obsessed with an impossible task, Karen appeared, holding a flashlight, still in her floral nightgown as usual. She walked up to the mailbox, her face tense as if preparing to face a monster, not just a titanium mailbox. Karen stopped, staring at it for a long while, probably trying to figure out if there was a weak spot she could exploit. After a moment, she lifted her foot and began preparing for the next legendary kick. I sighed with satisfaction, ready to witness the moment I had been anticipating all week. And then the kick came. She took a deep breath, raised her leg, and kicked the mailbox with all her might. You can imagine just how powerful it was. The kick was so strong that it felt like she was kicking a truck, and the result was she fell straight to the ground. Her leg hit the steel mailbox, throwing her completely off balance, and she tumbled backward. The lantern flew away, and Karen was left lying flat on the ground, clutching her foot and writhing in pain. I couldn't stop laughing. It was like a scene from a slapstick comedy I'd seen 100 times. Only this time, I was the main character, and Karen was the one suffering the consequences of her arrogance. She sat up, her foot throbbing with pain, but still tried to stand, refusing to accept defeat. She looked at the mailbox, probably hoping it would disappear. But no, it stood there, steadfast and unmoving like a rock. I knew I had won. But I also knew Karen wasn't going to accept this defeat easily. And just as I predicted, the next morning when I went out to get the paper, I saw the most wonderful sight. Karen sitting on a bench, her foot bandaged, her face twisted in pain. I couldn't do anything but smile with delight. The feeling was indescribable. But the story didn't end there. Refusing to lose, Karen didn't just quietly endure the pain in silence. She decided to sue me. Yes, you heard that right. Karen, who had deliberately kicked my mailbox, was now accusing me of installing a dangerous structure that could harm others. It was definitely a joke. But Karen didn't think so. She went to a law office, and it seemed like things had gotten serious. The next day I received a notice from the court demanding that I appear because I had allegedly installed a dangerous structure. I chuckled, unable to believe what I was reading. This woman, who had continuously destroyed my property, was now trying to make herself out to be a victim of a crime she herself had caused. But I wasn't scared. I was ready for this battle. If Karen thought she could twist the truth just because she got hurt from her own actions, she was completely wrong. I thought, if she wants to fight me in court, then I'll show her what a real fight looks like. And I had prepared all the necessary evidence, the video of her kick, clear footage of her vandalism, with no way for her to escape the truth. When the trial began, I sat up straight, calmly waiting. Karen sat next to her lawyer, looking extremely confident, as if she were the one who had already won. As for me, I just sighed, feeling like I was stepping into a comedy show and not the one playing the main role. The judge, a very serious-looking man, glanced at us for a moment before starting the proceedings. "We will begin with the testimony from the plaintiff," he said. Karen stood up, head held high, and walked to the front of the bench, starting her speech with a voice full of emotion. "Your Honor," she began, her tone loud and emotional, "my client, Mrs. Karen Green, has suffered severe injuries due to the defendant's reckless actions. We have evidence to show that the mailbox the defendant installed is not merely a decorative object, but a dangerous structure that could cause serious harm to anyone. She was severely injured while attempting to push the mailbox, and now she is enduring unimaginable pain." I couldn't help but laugh as I listened to her. Sure, I thought to myself, she's describing a titanium mailbox like it's a war machine. But I made an effort to keep my expression serious and listened carefully. The judge looked at Karen with a skeptical expression. "So, you were actually injured when you kicked that mailbox, Mrs. Green?" he asked in a stern tone. Karen immediately stood up straight, gesturing dramatically. "Yes, Your Honor. I was in so much pain that I couldn't walk. That mailbox was so hard, it was like a rock crusher. Ah, the judge said. So do you know what material the mailbox was made of? Did you realize that kicking it could result in injury to yourself? Karen froze for a moment, but still tried to stay calm. Your Honor, I didn't know it was that hard. I just wanted, I just wanted to protect this neighborhood from such dangerous things. The judge glanced at me, then back at Karen, clearly dissatisfied. So you deliberately kicked a structure that you considered dangerous without any warning. Do you think your actions were reasonable? Karen began to feel the pressure, her face turning red with embarrassment. She turned to her lawyer as if seeking support, but her lawyer merely shook his head and sat silently. Karen looked back at the judge and softly said, I didn't think it would be that hard. The judge raised an eyebrow. So, can you explain to me why you kicked someone else's mailbox, knowing that such an action could damage property and cause injury to yourself? Didn't you cause the injury to yourself? Karen was flustered, stammering, I didn't think it would be that strong. The judge sighed and then turned to me. Defendant, do you have anything to present regarding this case? I stood up, giving a slight smile, and handed the USB drive. Your Honor, I just want to say that I have prepared some evidence. If Mrs. Karen wants to talk about the danger of the mailbox, I have a video showing her exact actions. Please let the court view it. I handed the USB to the officer, and the video began playing on the screen. First, there were clips from the days before I installed the new titanium mailbox. The first scene showed one evening when Karen, in her floral nightgown, walked up to my mailbox. She stopped, looked at it for a moment, and then gently pushed the mailbox, causing it to lean slightly. After that, she quickly glanced around and hurried off. The next video was from another evening. This time, Karen didn't just push the mailbox, she kicked it with force. The mailbox swayed and fell to the ground, and Karen stood watching for a moment before walking away, as if she had completed a mission. When the video switched to the day after I installed the titanium mailbox, the footage showed Karen appearing at 2 a.m., approaching the new mailbox. She was preparing to kick it and then delivered a powerful kick, but this time, the kick was so strong that she lost her balance and fell to the ground, while the titanium mailbox remained standing firm. The entire courtroom fell silent, and I could clearly see Karen's face go from flushed to pale. She stared at the screen as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The judge paused the video, then looked at Karen with a stern expression. You're the one who kicked this mailbox, correct? The judge asked, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Karen at this point could no longer say anything, only lowering her head, her eyes welling up. Yes, I kicked it. An eerie silence filled the courtroom. The judge took off his glasses, wiped his eyes, and finally declared, "This case is dismissed. There is nothing to argue here. The defendant is innocent." And so, Karen realized the truth. She was the loser in this battle. The entire courtroom sighed in relief, while Karen, with her head down, didn't utter another word. After failing in court, Karen couldn't accept the truth. Instead of backing down, she became more stubborn, as if she had never lost. With no chance of winning in court, Karen decided to continue her fight in a different way, by asking the neighborhood residents to sign a petition demanding that I remove the titanium mailbox. But unlike what she expected, this time she underestimated the patience of the neighbors. When she started handing out the petition around the neighborhood, claiming that my mailbox was a danger to the safety of the community, the residents were no longer willing to tolerate her. The story about Karen had spread throughout the neighborhood, and everyone was tired of her behavior. One morning, I saw Karen standing at the door of Mrs. Susan's house, a neighbor who lived right next to me, handing her the petition. But instead of agreeing, Susan immediately slammed the door, her face showing clear displeasure. Then, Mr. Jack, an elderly man at the end of the street, when he saw Karen walking by, loudly said, "Karen, you really are a big trouble for this neighborhood. Don't you have anything better to do?" And so, instead of receiving support, she was met with head shakes and objections. But Karen didn't stop. She continued going from house to house, but each time she knocked on a door, she was rejected. Some neighbors even started to openly refuse to sign the petition and warned her not to bother them anymore. One day, I was standing outside, witnessing a rather humorous scene when she went to speak to Michael, a close friend of mine. He simply said, "Karen, if you want us to sign the petition, you can go somewhere else and find someone else. Stop bothering us here." And that's when she started to realize that her fight had no support left. The neighbors were tired of her actions, and now, instead of turning their backs, they had decided to do the opposite. They started talking about removing Karen from the neighborhood. When Karen realized that her plan to collect signatures demanding I remove the mailbox had failed miserably, she didn't know that a covert campaign had already begun in the neighborhood. The residents, who were tired of Karen's constant harassment, began quietly connecting with one another. They decided that instead of letting Karen continue to ruin their lives, they would stand together. And this time, they wouldn't just ask for my mailbox to be removed, but also for Karen to be removed from the neighborhood. It all started when Mrs. Helen, who lived directly across from me, stood up and said she couldn't take it anymore. "We can't let Karen keep bothering us," she said, her voice full of anger. Immediately, other neighbors, including Michael and Mr. Jack, agreed. They began discussing ways they could make Karen leave without having to intervene publicly. A few days later, when Karen continued going door to door to collect signatures demanding the removal of my mailbox, instead of receiving supportive signatures, she was met with people who had signed a different petition. Mrs. Susan, instead of signing Karen's petition, handed her a new one, which called for Karen's removal from the neighborhood. "This is the one we need," Mrs. Susan said. "This is the petition you should be giving to people." Karen stood there, stunned, not understanding what was happening. This petition not only demanded that Karen leave, but also encouraged other residents to sign it in order to protect the peace of the neighborhood. Day by day, more neighbors, even those not very close to me, joined in the movement. At first, they signed just to be done with hearing about my mailbox, but gradually, they realized that if they did nothing, Karen would continue to harass everyone. Within a week, the number of signatures demanding Karen's removal surpassed the necessary amount to put pressure on the Homeowners Association, HOA. It became a big event, a strong reminder that not everyone can behave however they want without facing consequences. The whole neighborhood came together to stand against Karen's nuisance, and now the goal wasn't just about the mailbox anymore, but about restoring peace for everyone. As the number of signatures demanding Karen's removal from the neighborhood grew, Karen began to feel the change. Phone calls from the Homeowners Association, HOA, were no longer something new to her. The whole neighborhood was now well aware of Karen's harassment, and they had decided it was time to take action. Finally, the community's resistance was about to come to a head. One afternoon, I received a notice from the HOA about an emergency meeting. When I arrived at the meeting room, I could feel the tension in the air. The whole neighborhood seemed united, eagerly waiting to address the issue with Karen. I couldn't help but smile when I saw her walk into the meeting room, her face unable to hide the anxiety. She tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but her eyes clearly revealed her unease. When the meeting began, Mr. Tom Harris, the head of the HOA, spoke up. "We have received numerous complaints about Mrs. Rod, Karen Green's behavior. Today, we will make a decision about whether she should continue to live in this neighborhood." The room fell silent, and everyone's eyes were fixed on Karen, waiting for her reaction. Karen, unaware that she was surrounded, stood up and tried to justify her actions. "I just want to protect this neighborhood from danger. David's mailbox is a threat to the safety of all of us." She said this angrily, as if she were standing before a grand court of justice. But no one in the room believed her story anymore. The residents began speaking out, expressing their disgust at Karen's behavior. "We can't let you keep disturbing our lives," Mrs. Helen said. "Enough is enough, Karen." Mr. Michael also stood up and added, "We can't live in a neighborhood where you just bring trouble and problems. It's time for you to leave." Finally, the judge in the HOA meeting looked around the room, then decided to call for a vote. "We will vote on whether or not to ask Mrs. Karen to leave the neighborhood." The entire room nodded in agreement. The consensus from the community was clear. A quick vote was held, and the result was Karen was asked to leave with unanimous consent. It felt like a fresh breeze had swept through the neighborhood. All the neighbors were happy, knowing that they had finally regained their peace. And as for me, I felt relieved that this battle had ended. But that wasn't the complete end. The next day, I saw the for sale sign in front of Karen's house. She didn't say a word, quietly preparing to leave, her face filled with anger and disappointment. Although she had lost everything, I couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction. The neighborhood had regained its peace, and I could continue living my life without worrying about Karen's antics anymore. My story with Karen ended like that, but for the neighborhood, it was a lesson about unity and the power of the community. When people come together, they can change anything, even if it's just a mailbox.